Hello everybody, it's Professor Parish, and we are just springing forward in this class. We're already at week 4. To put it in perspective, this class has 10 total weeks, which includes spring break for one of those weeks and includes finals week for one of those weeks. So we are already at 4 of 10 weeks. We're, over 25% through the class already, which is kind of crazy. So I want to go over a couple of things with you all. Obviously, we're going to talk about poetry starting this week. I can't believe we're already through fiction. Spring break really accelerates the fiction part of this class for the short semester. So we are going to spend a couple weeks on poetry, a couple weeks on drama, and then go right into our final paper. So this class is going to go pretty quickly. So I just want to remind everybody to make sure that you stay on top of assignments, that you're getting every assignment done each week. Especially the papers are extremely important. The discussion forums are extremely important because they are 40 points. So just missing one discussion forum in an 8-week class is like missing 2 in a regular course. So please don't think that you can just skip the discussion forums and be like, I'll be fine. You won't. So make sure that you're doing the discussion forums, that you're doing your papers, that you try to do all of the assignments each week. And as I will show you, I have opened up several of the assignments ahead of time, so you can work ahead if you want to. Most of you are on top of things. Everything's fine. But I don't want you to feel comfortable right now. Because sometimes students, the first couple weeks, they're like, oh, I'm doing great. I got a 96. I'll just slack off for a couple weeks. And you can't do that. So just keep doing what you're doing. Keep moving forward. If you don't have the grade that you want in this class, you still have plenty of time to make that grade up. But you just need to be diligent and be aware that you can't slack off or keep slacking off in the class, especially with this being an 8-week course and us already being at week 4. So still tons of points in the class left over, but I just want to bring that up there before we go any further. So as for what's due this week, I'm going to go to our course content. And please note that while it does show you this due next box, please make sure that you scroll down to the current week. And the reason for this is that this little box up here only shows at max 2 assignments. If I have assigned more than 2 assignments, one of those assignments won't show up in the box up there, which is kind of annoying. So, for example, you have 3 assignments due this week, but if you went up there, it would only show 2. It wouldn't show the discussion forum. So just be aware of that. Scroll down to week 4. The dates are listed right here. So this is this current week. The paper 2 thesis and outline drop box, we're going to talk about it here in a little bit. Reading response 3, we're going to talk about it. And then obviously the week 4 discussion forum is pretty cut and dry. It's just like the discussion forums that we've been doing. You've got a post. All of the posts in this class are due by Friday for the entire length of the semester. And then your responses are due by Sunday. And I've had some students in the past, they have complained. They'll be like, well, why isn't everything due on Sunday? Why is this one assignment due on Friday? Well, the reason for that is that if I put everything due Sunday, chances are, and I say this with experience, chances are students will not post on Friday or before. They will all wait until Sunday, and then everyone posts on Sunday. And that's all fine and well, but not all of the students in this class have internet access on the weekends. Not everybody is available Sunday. You know, maybe you go to church, maybe that's your day away from the internet, maybe you're at family member's house and they don't have internet access or a computer access, whatever the case may be. I don't like putting every single assignment due on one day because I feel like we as humans tend to procrastinate. And so I would rather at least have the post due Friday, and then hopefully enough of you post on time, like you should, to where you could actually get the discussion forum done on Friday and then only have your remaining assignments due the weekend. So my goal as an instructor is to help you kind of break away from procrastinating or waiting until the last minute. This class definitely does not reward that. So that's why. But your discussion forum post is due Friday, March 29th by 11:55 p.m. Your responses are due Sunday, and then your thesis outline, Dropbox, and reading response are both due Sunday as well. So, let's talk about paper 2. Now that we've started it, I have pulled up your thesis and outline Dropbox. When I click on it here, please note that every assignment turned in this class should be either a PDF, a rich text format or RTF, or a Windows Word document, which is DOC or DOCX only. I cannot open Pages files. I cannot open OSDs, which is the offshoot Word, and I can't open like OSTs or weird formats. So just please be aware of that. If your assignment is not turned in the proper format, then you will not get credit for it. So just be aware of that. So what I want to know for this Dropbox is I want to know, and we're going to talk about your options here in a second. So I want to know what your options are, which you've picked for paper 2. What are your choices in making that option? For example, if you chose option 1, which we'll talk about here shortly, which poems are you comparing and contrasting? Why did you choose them? And then also this thesis section is a chance for you to ask any questions. So if you have questions about the assignment, you can ask them in this thesis assignment. You also need to include a rough draft of an outline for this paper, much like you did for the paper 1 thesis and outline Dropbox. And if you forgot how to do those, there is a thesis and outline guideline that is in the handout section. It's towards the very front of the class. I think it's in week 1. So just be sure to double check that. So I'm going to pull up the guidelines that are listed as our resource for this, and these can be found either in the resources page or on the home page. If you just scroll down, you'll see these guidelines. But anyway, so I'm going to maximize this, and I'm going to zoom in. Like paper 1, you have a lot of options with paper 2. I'm going to start out with the first one. The first one is probably the most straightforward option. And option 1 for your paper number 2 is to choose 2 poems from our textbook or from an alternate source. You are going to analyze these poems and incorporate elements discussed in our chapters, and then create your own very short poem that mirrors the way the poem that you analyzed was constructed. So for example, you could choose a poem by Robert Frost and a poem by Edgar Allan Poe. And the idea is that you are going to possibly either analyze both of them separately, or you can do a compare and contrast paper where you compare and contrast how these 2 poems are similar and different. At the end of that paper, preferably before your conclusion, you are going to create a very short 1 to 2 verse poem. It can be longer if you want. 1 to 2 verse poem where you imitate one of those authors that you talk about. Because Edgar Allan Poe and Robert Frost are quite different, and trying to combine them would be a weird hodgepodge. So let's say if I'm writing this paper, I'm going to imitate Robert Frost. So my little poem would maybe talk about nature. It would have a certain type of meter, which we'll talk about shortly. It will imitate the style that Robert Frost writes in with his poetry. And that's the idea. This is not a creative writing class. So I am not grading your poem on whether it's, a Nobel Peace Prize winning poetry piece. No, what I'm grading you on is that you understand how these poets have crafted their work and that you can imitate it. Imitation is the best form of flattery, right? So that's the idea. As long as you can create a short poem and it imitates the style or the language or the terminology that is used from that poet, then you're going to get full credit for that poem. Absolutely. So that's option 1, comparing and contrasting 2 poems and creating a short poem of your own. I'm going to skip option 2 for a second and talk about option 3, because option 3 is very, very similar to option 1. Option 3 is, instead of 2 poems, you are choosing 2 songs. So this has been a really popular option, option 3 because we listen to music constantly, I think, and or at least I do. So a lot of students will choose option 3 and will choose 2 songs. They can be in the same genre, so they can be 2 country songs, 2 rock songs, 2 rap songs, whatever you want. Or they can be from 2 different genres. I had a student last semester analyze a song, a parody of a country song by an artist, and then a country song by an artist, and showed how they were similar and different. It was really cool. It was an awesome paper. So you could do something like that. And then in that you talk about which song is maybe the better of the 2, how poetry elements are used in that song, because songs are lyrics. They are forms of poetry. And at the end, much like you create your own poem for option 1, you'll create your own short song for option 3. Okay? So options 1 and 3 are very similar. One talks about poems, one talks about songs. Option 2 is by and far the most creative option that you can pick. And that is when you will choose 2 pictures, 2 photographs, and you will create a short poem for each. So you have 2 pictures, 2 poems, and then you will talk about the choices that you made in picking the pictures and creating the poems. Why did you, if your poem is open form, why? Did you just like that style, or is there a reason behind it? You kind of explain the process of how you created those poems and did the things that you did in the paper. So, yeah, option 1 and 3 are more kind of straightforward by the book examples, and then option 2 is the most creative example of the 3. And I would recommend, if you choose option 2, to use your own photos. And the reason I say that is, if you use your own pictures, you do not have to cite them. If you get a picture off of Google Images, or if you find a picture online, you have to cite that picture. And sometimes, you know, maybe it's better if you just use your own photos. So you are basically, you can't cite yourself, so you don't have to use citations on the pictures if they are your own photographs. Now, how do I add a photograph to the paper? Well, simply put, you'll go to Insert on a Word document, and you'll click this picture icon, and it will let you choose a photo from your computer. Once it does that, there will be a bar up here that says Format Images, and you'll click on that. That will give you the option to format the image. It'll have an option that says Align, Square Word Text, something along that. Choose that, and it'll let you move the picture around the screen wherever you want. If you have questions about this, please let me know. But anyway, for your thesis and outline assignment, I want to see which option you chose, which poems or songs or pictures you're choosing to analyze or write about, and then also let me know kind of your idea of your points that you're going to talk about in your paper, and then create a short outline that kind of structures how your paper is going to look. And these are not set in stone. I'm not making you sign away like Ariel on the scroll and sign your voice away. No, these are just something to get you started. I hope that you stick with the pictures or the poems that you choose, but your outline can change, it can alter. This is all just trying to get you some thoughts on paper and a structure on paper that you can work off of. So, formatting wise, how long is this paper? Well, it kind of depends, but your paper analysis, the analysis itself should be at least 2 pages. So no matter what option you pick, options 1, 2, or 3, all 3 options require you to spend 2 full pages talking about the poems that you created, talking about the choices that you made, talking about the poems and the terminology that they use that you're analyzing. 2 full pages of analysis. That includes an introduction, that includes a conclusion, and it includes your body paragraphs. Okay? Each of the poems that you create, either for option 1, 2, or 3, should be at least half a page each. So at the minimum, this paper is 2.5 pages. At the maximum, your poems can be as long as you want, and your analysis can be as long as you want as well. Okay? But some students forget to do this analysis part. That's half the grade, so don't forget that. Make sure you are analyzing your poems, talking about the choices that you've made. If you chose option 2, don't forget this part right here. The font for the actual paper needs to be 12 point, no bold, no large fonts. Now for the poems themselves, you can format those however you want. You can do crazy fonts, crazy sizes with those, but your actual analysis needs to stay pretty standard to the college essay. 1-inch margins, double spaced for analysis. The poem formatting can vary a little bit. So for example, in college I did a poem and it was the verses kind of made a wave down the page, and that was the idea. So you could do something cool with the formatting of the poem, but your essay needs to look, your analysis needs to look like an essay. Spelling and grammar should be standard American English. You will do a works cited page for this paper if you want full credit. If you're choosing options 1, 2, or 3, you really only have to cite your book, because this textbook is where you're getting all your poetry terminology from. So we need to give credit to our authors of our textbook. So you will need to cite your textbook. The only other sources that you might have to cite, like I said, if you choose images off the internet, you need to cite those. If you found poems or song lyrics off of the internet, you need to cite those. You need to make a citation for the sites you found the information on. Or if you have any other types of information or sources you use other than this book, you need to cite it. And then we're going to talk about MLA next week with our paper. So get ready. It's going to be a fun talk about MLA. All of the components and drafts are due on time for full credit. So due dates. The thesis and outline assignment is due this Sunday, March 31st. The final draft of paper 2 is due Sunday, April 7th. And I'm going to try to get the MLA video out by Sunday night. I'm doing 4 classes this semester, so I do usually 2 classes on Sunday for videos, and then 2 classes on Monday, or a class on Monday, class on Tuesday for videos. I'm going to try to definitely get our video for this class out by Sunday next week, because I want to spend some time on MLA and give you plenty of time to watch that video. So just stay tuned for that. And then, as always, you can email me with questions about the paper itself. How the paper is broken down: your introduction and conclusion is worth 10 points. The poetic elements you describe, this is your analysis, is worth 30. Creativity and effort, this is the poem you create, this is the conversation you create in your paper. As long as it shows that you put some effort in, you just didn't throw something on the page, you'll get full credit for this part. Spelling and grammar is 30 points, and then the page length and formatting is 10 points. The formatting's a little different with this paper, so just make sure you follow the guidelines. I did post an example paper, if it helps. I'm going to pop that up for you all. Yeah. So this example paper is from earlier last year, and it is T.S. Eliot took the poetry anthology, Old Possum's Book to Practical Cats, which is a book about poetry that the musical Cats was based off of, and he analyzes 2 poems here and talks about each. You can see he has his introduction all figured out here, talks about the first poem, talks about the second poem, talks about how they're similar, talks about how they're different, and then explains in the conclusion that they've created their own little poem, and then they list the poem, Oh Kitty Cat, right here. Boom! And at the very end they cite the textbook that he got the poems out of. Perfect! If you choose option 1 or 3, this is exactly what it should look like. It's a pretty straightforward paper. If you choose option 2, you can have it set up just like this for your analysis, but then down here when you get to the actual poems, you can have picture and poem, and then picture and a poem, and then the conclusion, and then the works cited. I'm not picky on how you format it, as long as it makes sense and you're consistent. Alright? So that example paper, along with your guidelines, are listed in the resources, as well as on the home page down here at week 4. They're shown here. And then our poetry presentation is what we're going to finally go over. And that will kind of round out our discussion of poetry for this week. All right. So we're going to talk about chapters 12 through 15 in our book here. And on chapter 12, which is our poetry preview, I want to talk about the photo they use to start off our discussion of poetry. And that takes place on page 611. So you've got this picture of Michael Jordan dunking the ball there. I think it's highly appropriate given that we're in the middle of March Madness and we're playing, if you watch basketball like I do, hopefully your brackets are fine. Mine was ruined long ago. But I find it really interesting that of all the photos in the chapters that we have, that Michael Jordan is the representation for poetry. And I always ask my students, why? Why Michael Jordan? Why him? If you don't know who Michael Jordan is, he was an extremely popular, I would argue, one of the most popular basketball players of the 1990s. When I was a kid, everybody loved Michael Jordan. Like, everybody had their favorite basketball player, but you couldn't deny that Michael Jordan was awesome at basketball. That he was considered the best of his craft. Okay? I mean, the guy was the star of Space Jam. Let's be honest. But my point is that this book was written in 2000. I mean, the newest update was in 2003. So that was quite a while ago, but it was right on the curtails of Michael Jordan being, you know, in the back-to-back championships for the Chicago Bulls. So why Michael Jordan? Well, he's the best representation of basketball at its best, of a player at their best. Poetry is language at its best, as our textbook defines. And I love this textbook's definition. Absolutely love it, because it's so true. You've probably read bad fiction. There are bad novels out there that have been published. They're not the best. But if poetry is published, for the most part, it has to be language at its best. It has to be good. Poets need to know exactly which words to use, how to create a rhythm, how to format them perfectly to create the right atmosphere, to create the right movement, to create the right sound. When you read poetry aloud, it is so much different than just reading it off the page in your mind. Like, it's a different experience. And poets, a good poet will understand that. And it's almost like an art form, crafting your words to create this entity that you end up with. So it's language at its best. It's different than other genres of literature for numbers of reasons. And our book defines them, you know, down here. Poetry comes from a confusing flow of experience. Poems are often moments or seconds or an idea expanded upon, whereas a novel is constantly in a situation of flowing through time. Like, you don't spend, unless you're Charles Dickens and you're writing, being paid per word, most of your stories, they don't spend a paragraph talking about what the air felt like. Right? A poem, an entire poem could just be about what that is. An entire poem could just be about a single second in time, whereas in a novel, the story has to keep progressing. So you can't just sit there and focus on this one tiny moment. You have to keep moving. Poetry can focus on those moments, and that's what sets it apart from other genres. They don't give data or facts often. They're mostly about emotional experience, about emotional trauma, or emotional joy, or revelation. I mean, they're not just about random plots. They often have a more emotional connection. And they look different. Poems are printed in lines of verse, so they're not in paragraph form. They're more like in short verses or couplets. All right? So our poetry terminology in this chapter, and this is listed throughout pages 613 and on, but we have two main types of poems. One is an epic, and one is a lyric. And an epic is a long poem with an elevated style. So probably the most common example I can think of is Beowulf. And yes, Beowulf, while it seems like prose, is actually a very long epic poem. And you may be asking yourself, well, it doesn't seem like a poem. That's because we're reading a translation. In the original language that Beowulf is written in, it has a very poetic feel. It has a meter, it has a rhythm to it, and it has poetic qualities, whereas when we translate it to English, a lot of those qualities are lost. It's kind of like when you listen to a song by Shakira, and you can tell it was originally in Spanish, and now you're listening to it in English, and some of the words seem weird, or they don't match up right, or it's just, they match the melody, but they don't make sense. Yeah, that's kind of how Beowulf is being translated too. There's a little bit lost in the translation, and that's definitely the poetic elements of it. On the other hand, we are probably most familiar as a Western American culture with lyrics, which are short poems. So songs you hear on the radio are more than likely lyrics. I think the only one you could maybe call into question is a Stairway to Heaven, maybe. So other terms we have, an extended metaphor. We've talked about metaphor in the last week, that they are comparing two things without using like or as. An extended metaphor is when that comparison extends throughout the poem rather than just being an instance or two within it. Rhyme is on page 264. And I would argue rhyme is probably the term we're most familiar with in poetry, because most poems we think of rhyme. They have this echo effect when the last sound at the end of a syllable is repetitive or similar. And we'll talk more about rhyme and kind of things similar to rhyme very shortly. And then a stanza is a set of related lines in a poem. Stanza and verse are sort of synonyms. They're kind of basically the same thing. If you could say you're writing in stanzas or writing in a verse, I would say that you're probably meaning the exact same thing. And on page 625 at the very top here, we have an example poem, and we have the pattern of the stanza listed out. So this poem seems a little cheerful, and then the more when you actually read it out loud, you're like, maybe not so much. So this poem at the top of 625, if I say, "Fear no more the heat of the sun, nor the furious winter's rages. Thou thy worldly task hast done, home art gone and taken thy wages. Golden lads and girls all must, as chimney sweepers, come to dust." Kind of grim, right? But I want you all to look at the last few words of that stanza, where you have, and this is the rhyme scheme, this is the pattern that you would identify if you were analyzing this poem. So I could say, okay, I have sun. So when I start out with sun, I'm going to label it A, because it's the first word in the stanza, at the end of the stanza. Then I have rages. Rages and sun do not rhyme. So I'm going to put a B by it so we can differentiate A from B, sun from rages. Now, thou thy worldly task hast done. Done and sun rhyme. They're kind of half rhymes. They're not total rhymes, but they're close enough. So I'm going to put an A by it. So we have A, B, A. Sun, rages, done. Wages rhymes definitely with rages. So we have A, B, A, B. And then the last two lines, all must come to dust. Must and dust rhyme, but they don't rhyme with sun or wages. So we'll put CC there. So that A, B, A, B, CC pattern, that's what you could identify and note in your paper as how the poem is patterned or organized. So that would be nice to mention in your paper. All right, so on page 626, we talk about meter. Meter is the regulated, free-flowing rhythm of ordinary speech. So it's how we say poetry. It's how your speech is a little bit different when you read poetry aloud. It almost creates its own rhythm, right? And rap music, for example, stands for rhythm and poetry. It has its own meter, and we'll talk about that in a second. But within meter, we have two terms. One is the foot, and a foot in a poem is when a line of poetry is separated into two-part segments. Iambic is when you stress the last syllable of that two-part segment. So you have two syllables, two parts, a foot. Iambic feet is when you stress the last syllable in that foot. So on page 626 there, if you look down, we have Robert Frost's Walking Through the Woods on a Snowy Evening. Look towards the middle of page 626 there, and you'll see this verse. And I'm going to read this verse out loud, and I want you to think, see if you notice anything. So I'll say, whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. So if you noticed, my voice in the words kind of starts to go up and down, create this up and down sound. So that's meter. Now, if you'll notice, in all this verse, each line is separated into little two-syllable segments, which are our feet. So we have, whose woods these are, I think, I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And you'll notice that the second word is the one that carries weight to it. That is iambic. So whose woods these are, I think, I know. Like it's the word that has the punch is the second word, and that's iambic. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. Why would Frost do this? Why would he create this poem that has this very distinct rhythm and beat to it? Well, unfortunately, Robert Frost is no longer alive, so we can't call him up and interview him. But I do have a pretty good theory. And that would be, if you actually look at this poem, this is all about him riding a horse through the woods on a snowy evening. There weren't cars. Cars were not popular at the time this poem was written, so most people traveled on horseback to get from one location to the next. If you listen to this poem and you look at that and you do that little syllable thing for meter here, what does it sound like? To watch his woods fill up with snow. It does sound like a heartbeat. You could argue that. The dun 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 dun. But I also kind of feel like Monty Python, the Holy Grail. I've got my two coconuts and I'm banging them together, going to watch his woods fill up with snow. Clop, 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 clop. It is the sound of horse hooves walking through snow. That is the idea behind the meter that he creates. He wanted to give readers, as they read aloud, the imitation and the feeling that you are walking through the woods with him on horseback through the snow. It's genius! I'm not the most big Robert Frost fan because he writes a lot of nature poetry, and I'm not sold on nature poetry, but the fact that he took the time to craft this verse to create this rhythm that would create this sound when it was read to imitate a horse being ridden through snow, it's genius. It's just that good. So, in other news, examples that are not quite as classy as Robert Frost, I did want to show you all this example here to talk about a more modern example that utilizes meter. So hold on just okay, so we're back. This is Todd in the Shadows. He is a pop song reviewer and I've watched him for years. He's actually a graduate with a music degree, so he knows what he's talking about. But he likes to review pop songs and country songs, usually songs he doesn't like. So if you like the song Cruise by Florida Georgia Line, I apologize already because he's pretty harsh about them. But my point is he's going to talk about Nellie. the St. Louis rapper from the late 90s, early 2000s. He's going to talk about Nelly, and he's going to mention meter. He's not going to call it meter. He's going to call it something else. But just hang with this video for this short clip here, and he's going to talk a little bit about Nelly and bring up a good point that I want to kind of iterate here.
Why did it take these two genres so long to get together? Now, being of the newer American Eagle-wearing breed of country singers, Florida Georgia Line are openly fans of hip-hop. They even have one of their songs spell "it's" with a Z. That's still cool, right? Was it ever? But anyway, the remix was actually Nelly's idea.
Yo, I was checking out the Cruise video, man. And that thing the deal, boy. I think we need to turn it up, though. What you think?
Both Florida and Georgia there say they were super psyched about it because they've been listening to Nelly since they were kids. Because, holy crap, Country Grammar came out 13 years ago and they would have been in middle school. And Nelly is almost 40. And I found a gray hair in the mirror the other day. And anyway, why did Nelly pick this song to guest on? Well, like
Here we
I said,
go.
the subject matter fits, but also, have you ever listened to Nelly's flow? That sing-songy thing he does?
It's meter.
Yeah, if you listen, it's just two notes. Two notes, the fourth part, like this. Da, 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 da. And Cruise?
When I first saw that bikini top on her, she's popping right out of the South Georgia water.
Da 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 da. Two notes. Perfect for Nelly. And my knowledge of Nelly is a little rusty because...
Alright, so yes. Basically, my point is, yeah. Let me get back to the part. There we go. Yeah. So yeah, Nelly is a good modern example of a artist using meter, and you could probably find, I mean, he compared Florida Georgia Line, they use meter, same way. It's just that sing-songy way of speaking poetry, and it creates a rhythm and a beat. And Nelly is a very good example of someone who has a very distinct use of meter. Constantly, like he said, that was the two notes and a fourth part. So I'm sure you could find other examples of modern country music, pop music, rap, rock artists that do the exact same thing. I just find it funny that it's Nelly that seems to pop up as one of the prolific ones there. But yeah, so meter, feet, and iambic. We will be coming across these terms quite a lot in this textbook as you go forward. So I talked a little bit earlier about half rhyme and slant rhymes. These are words that don't necessarily rhyme, but they sound similar. So, for example, you could look on page 629, and there's talk about half rhymes and slant rhymes. So the poem above on page 629, Truth, if you look at that poem, we have the words shimmering and hammering together. Now, shimmering and hammering don't necessarily rhyme, but they have that hammering sound at the end. That would be a half rhyme. The end syllable kind of rhymes, but the beginning does not. And then you also have the words, if you keep going down below that, you have like coolness and awareness. Those words don't rhyme, but they have similar sounds within them, so that would be a slant rhyme. So half rhyme and slant rhymes, basically words that have similar parts but don't exactly rhyme. All right. And then if we backtrack a page back to 627, we talk about free verse and open form. Now this will be on your exam. Free verse and open form are very similar. Neither of them have to rhyme. A poem in free verse or open form does not have to rhyme. There does not have to be a pattern, but there is one distinct difference between free verse and open form. Open form still has a form. It's in the title of the word itself. It still looks like a poem. It has a structure. It has a verse or stanza structure. It may not rhyme, it may not have a pattern, but it will on paper look like a poem. All right? Free verse, there are no rules. You completely throw it out. You can construct a free verse poem and it can look however you like. That opening poem on page 609 by Dylan Thomas, that's practically a free verse poem. It just looks like a paragraph, right? Other than the stylistic choices of the emotional connection, the words, the high vocabulary, you might almost confuse it for prose. So I'm honestly not a fan of free verse or open form. I'm kind of more of a traditionalist. I want my poem to have a nice structure, a rhyme scheme, things like that. But I know a lot of friends that are into poetry that do like free verse and open form because of the limitless options that you have constructing it. So I get the appeal. It's just not personally for me. But I won't dock you if you choose to use it in your own poems. I mean, it's absolutely the style that you want to pick that's important. All right, so how we interact and read poetry, the big thing is that you give each poem a close reading, that you understand. You can't just skim over a poem. You need to read it pretty closely to get every little nook and cranny of information about it. Get your bearings, understand your author, research your author. If your poem is by someone you're not familiar with, research their background. Oftentimes poets put a lot of themselves into their work, so understanding their backstory might give you a new perspective when you read their work. Respond to the poem as a whole. Don't just read the first few lines and be like, ugh, this sucks. Read the whole thing and see if it is consistent throughout, or maybe it changes, maybe it gets better, maybe it takes on a new meaning. But examine the poem as a whole. Get into the spirit of the poem. If it's supposed to be sad, be aware of that. If it's a happy poem, understand that as well. And then be ready for a personal response. A lot of times poets create their work to elicit a response from their audience. Rachel McKibbens is probably one of my favorite modern poets. She writes some really devastating, sad poetry that's based off her personal experience, because she's had a very traumatic life. But it resonates with you, it sticks with you, and that's the intention. So there are some poems I read that I have a really personal connection to just because of my own personal experience, things like that. And that's kind of what they want. They want you to react to it and have a certain opinion or feeling associated with that poem. All right, vignettes versus haikus are on, they are on page 630. Let me go a little bit ahead here. 643 is the page that has haikus and vignettes. Vignettes are just what are called snapshot poetry. They are 1 to 3 lines. Rhyme scheme doesn't matter. They're just little photographs of poems. Haikus are definitely more structured. And I actually had a student one semester that hated haikus to the point where they were like, you better not assign me a haiku in our exam, Miss Parish. Spoiler alert, you do have to create a haiku. So their haiku was all about how much they hated haikus, and it was awesome. But haikus are 3 lines of poetry. Each line is a certain number of syllables. So the syllables of the first line have to be no more than 5, or exactly 5. The second line has to be exactly 7 syllables. And the third line has to be exactly 5 again. So you're limited, and you have to try to make each word count and fit into the right space. So you have class is almost done. 1 line. Can you hear spring calling now? 7. Wish class was over. So if you go by the library and see somebody doing this, like, they're probably in this class and they're probably counting out syllables for their haikus. That or they're doing math. Either way. I think haikus are a lot of fun because they're a challenge. They seem easy, but they're actually a little bit hard. To make a good haiku is actually quite difficult, because like here you can see I have repeated words, and there's a lot of like helping verbs, and it's just kind of like eh. But a good haiku will be very diverse and eclectic and very much more interesting than mine. But I would encourage you to try doing haikus. I think they're fun, but some people just really don't like them. So again, it's personal preference. All right, chapter 13 talks about the whole poem and pattern. So we have context, which is the web of meanings surrounding a poem. Every poem has a context or a web of meaning surrounding it, and a lot of it relate back to that list we just went over about the author, their background, your own response to it, things like that. Poems do this list here. They ask questions, they work out answers, they play off of opposites or what we call polarities, they help us compare and contrast things, they show us different points of views about a situation, and they can even build to a high point like a climax like prose can if it's a long enough poem. So they do a lot of emotional work. Poetry is a very emotional genre that kind of requests that we get involved and connected to that piece in order to really appreciate it. Concrete poetry is exactly that. It's just poetry about physical, tangible things. So like Robert Frost talking about walking through the woods on a snowy evening, that's a very concrete poem. Repetition, the purposeful repeating of certain styles or words. Some poems repeat the same word over and over again to create a more powerful effect. And then parallelism is similar to what we see in parallelism of fiction or prose. It's when you start and end with a similar format or text. Cumulative and counterpoint are two ways that you can structure a poem. Cumulative is like what we talked about in fiction with the roller coaster where it builds to a point and drops off. That's cumulative. So a poem kind of each verse, each line builds to this point and then it ends. Counterpoint poetry bounces like a pinball machine from one idea to the next, from point to point, and it never really builds to anything. It's just comparing or contrasting or talking about something. Antithesis takes a certain theme and builds upon the opposite of it. So if your poem is about the idea of charity, then maybe your poem will talk about someone that's greedy or someone that learns a lesson because they didn't share something. Like use that antithesis to bring home a point about something important. And then we have metaphysical, which is where you have passionate poems that analyze and rationalize emotions. It's all about ideas and concepts and feelings. It's the total opposite of concrete poetry. You could call it abstract, I suppose, in that regard. These two chapters here, image and metaphor, you'll notice there aren't really any terminology with these two chapters. It's just example poems and the set of glossy pages that we have on page 698. So I really like these set of glossy pages. There's I think 3 different sets in this book. I love them. I think it's so cool, the idea of combining an image with a poem. So these glossy pages is kind of what option 2 is on your paper, where you have a picture and a poem describing the picture. That's kind of option 2 in a nutshell, if you're wanting to see how it's done. But you can see kind of how the poems match up with the images pretty well. I think On Bananas and Grapefruit might be my favorite because it's like a tongue twister. But I also like Girl Powdering Her Neck, and I also like River Song as well. So definitely check those poems on the glossy pages out. Chapter 15 talks more in depth about metaphor and simile. So again, metaphor is comparing two things without like or as. Simile is using like or as. Be careful of cliches, especially in poetry. Some people take kind of the easy way out and they have cliches in their poems and they're very noticeable. You can extend a metaphor throughout a poem and it can kind of become its own central symbol almost. And then a controlling metaphor is when that happens, when you have the metaphor that's extended and becomes almost a central factor or theme driving the poem's existence. Figurative language, we talked about this a little bit last week. It is comparing something that's not real. So when you say, oh, I'm, figuratively speaking, that means you're not really saying it. You're just, posting a hypothetical situation. Sonnets. I know a lot of you did sonnets in high school, or I'm assuming a lot of you have done sonnets in high school. They are a specific 14-line poem. That's probably the biggest thing about them. Shakespeare liked writing sonnets. If you've ever seen Shakespeare, he's got a ton. Our book even has Shakespearean sonnets. I think there's like sonnet 73. It's Shakespeare, he had a lot of time to write on his hands. And then we have what we call conceits, which are elaborately developed and set up analogies of poems. So stories set up within poems to teach lessons, to give insight. Those are conceits. And that's our presentation for this week. So a lot of terminology. I would highly recommend that you keep this presentation, or at least pull it up when you're doing the test, or have it on hand. Yeah, I would definitely recommend that. One quick side note before I end this video, because I know I've carried on quite a while. I am in the process, as of this moment, everything is graded from last week except for your paper number 1. I am going to be working on that this week. Please bear with me. It is registration, and as some of you may know, I help out with the high schools. I do dual credit and do high school recruiting as well as teach. So this week is very, very busy. So if I know I've graded about 4 papers right now in the class, my goal is to get everybody graded by the weekend. Please be patient. If I've not graded your paper, don't worry. It is coming down the pipe. It just may take me a couple of days to get through it. You will get a chance to revise this paper, and I want to talk about that next week in the week 5 video. There will be 2 videos posted for week 5. One will be the lecture video, and one will be about MLA. So just stay tuned for those. I'm going to try to get them out by Sunday night. We shall see. But Monday night at the latest. I'm at least going to get the MLA video out by Sunday. And then Monday will be the other video at the latest for week 5. But if you all have any questions about the assignments this week, please let me know. It is registration week, so if you are a freshman or sophomore here at SIC and you want to get registered, if you are a freshman and you want to get registered for fall, please do so. If you're a high school student, I will probably be coming to your high school soon, or I may have already been there. Just let me know if you have any questions, and otherwise, I will see you all next week. Have a good one. Bye.